Jonathan Harrington was the kind of millionaire whose charm lit up any room he entered. He commanded attention with a single glance, his easy confidence woven into every crisp suit he wore. At his side, Elizabeth, his pregnant, dedicated wife, carried a grace that quietly spoke of loyalty and poise. But lurking in the shadows was Vanessa Reeves, a striking and ambitious mistress he'd fallen for despite all warnings. On the day the divorce papers were finally signed, Jonathan did the unthinkable. He married Vanessa instead. Little did he know, Elizabeth knew a secret that would blow his new marriage apart, and she left smiling. Jonathan Harrington's rise to wealth had been the stuff of business magazine covers and late-night talk show interviews. Born to a middle-class family in Brookline, Massachusetts, Jonathan had shown an early aptitude for finance. After getting accepted into Harvard, where he brushed shoulders with future power players, he threw himself into the high-stakes world of mergers and acquisitions. By 35, Jonathan had made his first million in a deal that even caught the attention of Warren Buffett, who publicly praised his audacity in a shareholders' meeting. This acknowledgement catapulted Jonathan to the center of business gossip columns, painting him as a young superstar in the making. It was around this time that he met Elizabeth Douglas, a bright-eyed social worker from a modest background who had, by coincidence, attended one of his fundraising galas for a children's hospital. Elizabeth was no stranger to the hardships of life. She'd grown up in a family of 6, barely making ends meet. Something about Jonathan's confidence and the way his eyes lit up when he spoke about helping others made her heart flutter. He, on the other hand, found Elizabeth's quiet strength, her resolve to help people even when her own resources were limited, absolutely magnetic. They dated for a year before he proposed, sliding a ring on her finger in front of a cheering crowd at a charity event in New York. The wedding was a lavish affair in the Harrington family's newly purchased Newport mansion. Journalists snapped photos of the bride in her elegant lace gown, tears of joy glistening on her cheeks, while the groom looked every bit the proud millionaire in a sleek black tuxedo. Tabloids ran the headline, "Millionaire Marries Social Worker," alongside gushing pieces about Elizabeth's grace and poise. People began to see them as a model couple, he with his unstoppable ambition, she with her unwavering kindness. Over the next year, Jonathan's career soared. He poured himself into new ventures, tech startups in Silicon Valley, real estate developments in Chicago, and even a biotech firm. Magazines described him as the next big thing, with references to Elon Musk's daring or Bill Gates's philanthropic potential. Meanwhile, Elizabeth worked as a counselor at an underprivileged youth center, devoting her time to forging mentorship programs that changed countless young lives. But behind the scenes, their marriage was not as flawless as it appeared in photos. While Jonathan showered Elizabeth with grand gestures, like surprising her with an orchestra to play at her birthday party or whisking her off to Bali for a weekend retreat, he also began to chase ever more demanding business prospects. He spent increasing amounts of time traveling and entertaining potential investors. Late-night phone calls became common. He insisted it was part of the job. At first, Elizabeth believed it wholeheartedly. She never questioned him because she trusted him. He was her husband, the man who had promised to protect her heart and stand beside her no matter what storms came their way. Yet, in the hush of empty hallways and silent dinners, she sometimes felt something was amiss. A sense of loneliness crept in, hinting that the fairy tale might be eroding at the edges. Before long, rumors began to swirl. Subtle at first, whispers in the boardroom, raised eyebrows at social gatherings. Then, ironically, a front-page splash in a tabloid. Millionaire playboy at it again? Elizabeth brushed it off as malicious gossip. Jonathan had always been faithful. At least, that was what she wanted to believe. But seeds of doubt were planted, and in the months to come, those seeds would grow into a thorny, tangled reality that would threaten to tear their lives apart. Jonathan's days became a blur of power lunches, red-eye flights, and multi-million-dollar negotiations. At times, he seemed possessed by the thrill of it all. Untouchable, unstoppable. Whenever Elizabeth tried to schedule some alone time to reconnect, he'd remind her of a critical meeting or an upcoming investor conference he just couldn't miss. Friends and acquaintances began to wonder if Elizabeth was simply turning a blind eye to keep the facade of a perfect marriage. In a bid to bridge the growing gap, Elizabeth decided to plan a special homecoming dinner for Jonathan. She spent hours cooking his favorite meal, roasted duck with orange glaze, garlic mashed potatoes, and a side of sautéed asparagus. She set the table with their finest china, a wedding present from her late grandmother. Soft jazz filtered through the living room, candlelight dancing on the walls. Elizabeth prayed this evening would rekindle the warmth they once shared. Jonathan arrived home past 9, exhausted from back-to-back meetings. He plopped onto a dining chair, absent-mindedly loosening his tie. Before he could launch into the same old complaint about work stress, Elizabeth took a deep breath and announced, "I'm pregnant." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Jonathan's expression cycled through surprise, joy, and then apprehension. He embraced her, wearing a forced smile that Elizabeth tried to ignore, attributing his tension to weariness. That night, he promised her a real celebration. Just not then. He was too tired. Yet the pregnancy did little to slow Jonathan's relentless pursuits. He threw himself deeper into his empire-building projects, determined to make an even bigger name for himself. Underneath his professional triumphs, a slow-burning restlessness began to pulse through him. Every time he closed a deal, he felt a fleeting rush, but moments later, an emptiness took hold. It was like chasing a mirage. The satisfaction never lasted. That was when Vanessa Reeves crossed his path. She was a striking brunette in her late 20s, a marketing consultant with a sharp intellect and an even sharper tongue. She strutted into one of Jonathan's cocktail receptions on the arm of an investment banker. Dressed in a sleek black gown, she exuded confidence and allure. Jonathan couldn't help but notice the way her eyes flickered in his direction throughout the evening. Vanessa worked for an up-and-coming PR firm rumored to have ties to big tech. She pitched Jonathan's company on a new brand development strategy. Their initial conversations were all business, meetings in plush boardrooms, guarded flirtations disguised as witty banter. But as they spent more time together, the chemistry between them crackled with undeniable intensity. Elizabeth, meanwhile, battled morning sickness that sometimes stretched into afternoon and night. She visited her doctor alone, waiting on stiff chairs in the clinic, wishing Jonathan were there to hold her hand. She told herself he was busy, that he'd be there for the important appointments. But deep down, a shadow of doubt darkened each day. Whenever he returned home, his mind seemed elsewhere, preoccupied, distant. She worried her pregnancy was more of a burden than a blessing to him, but she tried to push that thought away. As Elizabeth's belly grew, so did her longing for the closeness they once had. But Jonathan buried himself deeper in the high-octane world of corporate life. His phone buzzed continuously, texts, emails, late-night calls. The name Vanessa Reeves appeared more frequently in his schedule. Elizabeth tried to ask him about her once, in passing, and he casually brushed it off. "Just a marketing consultant," he said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. Yet, their marriage bed began to feel colder. Jonathan worked late or claimed he was too tired for any real conversation. He swore he was just pushing through a tough quarter, but Elizabeth sensed something else, something that made her heart tighten. She pretended not to see the suspicious receipts, the overabundance of business dinners, the frequent out-of-town trips. Every time she thought to bring it up, the image of their unborn child flashed before her eyes. She would swallow her fears, convincing herself it was only a phase, that Jonathan would soon come around. Little did she know, events were already in motion, and the life she had built with Jonathan was heading toward a dramatic fork in the road, one that would test every vow they'd ever made to each other. Vanessa Reeves was not the type of woman to settle for mediocrity. Raised in a household that valued glamour over loyalty, she learned early on how to work a room and captivate anyone she met. She was every bit as ambitious as Jonathan, but her tactics were far more cunning. She loved the thrill of a challenge, and Jonathan Harrington was a prize worth chasing. Their encounters shifted from stuffy conference tables to upscale lounges and restaurants. At first, they excused the meetings as essential to finalize marketing strategies. Over martinis garnished with olives, they'd talk business, flirting behind polite smiles. Often, these evenings ended in the glow of streetlights, with Jonathan driving Vanessa home, both of them lingering at her door longer than they should. Within weeks, their business relationship had evolved into something more intimate. Vanessa invited him to after-parties attended by celebrities and influential personalities. She introduced him to her circle of glamorous friends, painting a picture of a life beyond the stable, predictable world he shared with Elizabeth. Each time Jonathan felt a pang of guilt, Vanessa would smile, lean in, and whisper that he deserved more in life, more excitement, more passion. In the swirl of neon lights and champagne bubbles, Jonathan convinced himself that he was simply exploring possibilities, living his life to the fullest. After all, wasn't he the man everyone admired for his boldness? But as the weeks progressed, the line between excitement and betrayal blurred. They began to meet in secret at luxury hotels. Text messages were exchanged at all hours. The euphoria of their affair was a drug, and Jonathan found himself craving the high even though his conscience told him to stop. Elizabeth, in her own quiet world, was determined to keep the marriage afloat. She enrolled in prenatal classes, reading up on holistic birthing methods. She painted the spare room in a soft shade of yellow, picking out furniture that would create a tranquil haven for their child. Whenever Jonathan seemed stressed, she offered back rubs and words of encouragement. Sometimes he'd mumble a quick, "Thanks," but his eyes betrayed distraction. More cracks appeared in their relationship. Elizabeth noticed strange charges on their credit card statements, expensive dinners at times he claimed to be in meetings, a jewelry store purchase she didn't recognize. She even spotted a faint lipstick stain on his collar once, the color a shade she'd never wear. At night, she lay awake, tears soaking her pillow, wondering if she was enough. Jonathan, unable to face the truth of his duplicity, adopted a strategy of evasion. He gave Elizabeth half-baked excuses, claiming everything he did was for the financial security of their growing family. Deep inside, he sensed he was slipping from the man he used to be, a devoted husband who once valued love and loyalty above all else. Friends started noticing the tension. One evening, at a mutual friend's birthday dinner, Elizabeth sat alone, while Jonathan spent most of his time huddled with a group of acquaintances, telling stories of new ventures. She caught him texting under the table, a small frown etched on his brow. When she asked who he was texting, he claimed it was just a colleague. A fleeting sense of shame crossed his features, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Behind the scenes, Vanessa was orchestrating her maneuvers. She showered Jonathan with compliments, fueling his ego. She hinted about a future with him, describing vacations in Monaco and lavish parties in Miami, a shared life free from the mundane responsibilities that came with being married. She played the role of the understanding confidant, someone who got him, who didn't weigh him down with obligations. For Jonathan, torn between guilt and infatuation, the affair felt like a whirlwind of adrenaline that kept him from acknowledging the cracks in his conscience. But as the saying goes, every high has its crash, and the higher the climb, the more catastrophic the fall. Neither he nor Vanessa realized just how destructive their game would become, not just for Elizabeth, but for themselves as well. One chilly October afternoon, Elizabeth decided to take the day off from her usual volunteer work and surprise Jonathan at his office with homemade cookies, a gesture of warmth she hoped would break through the growing ice between them. Balancing a small basket of chocolate chip delights, she passed through the sleek glass doors of Harrington Enterprises. The receptionist greeted her politely, but Elizabeth sensed a flicker of unease in the woman's eyes. Jonathan was in a meeting, or so Elizabeth was told. She took a seat in the plush waiting area, flipping through a glossy business magazine featuring Jonathan's face on the cover. Minutes turned into a quarter hour. Eventually, the elevator doors slid open, and out stepped Vanessa Reeves, hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a fitted cream-colored dress that accentuated every curve. She paused when she saw Elizabeth, a momentary flash of surprise crossing her face. Elizabeth had never seen Vanessa in person before, but intuition flared. Something in Vanessa's smug, knowing smile felt like a silent declaration of war. Clutching the basket of cookies tighter, Elizabeth stood and approached. "You must be Vanessa Reeves," she said softly, forcing a polite smile. "I've heard Jonathan mention you." Vanessa responded with a practiced grin. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Harrington, he's mentioned you too. Congratulations on your pregnancy." The tone was friendly, but Elizabeth detected a hint of condescension. Vanessa's gaze dipped, almost dismissively, to Elizabeth's swelling belly. Before Elizabeth could reply, Jonathan emerged from the conference room, surprise evident on his face to see his wife and mistress in the same space. His posture tensed, but he quickly regained composure. "Liz, what a pleasant surprise," he said, striding forward to greet her with a kiss on the cheek. He turned to Vanessa. "I'll see you back at the office later. Thanks for your input." Vanessa gave them both a parting smile and stepped back into the elevator. Elizabeth attempted to mask her confusion, her heart pounding. She offered Jonathan the basket of cookies, telling him she missed him and wanted to do something thoughtful. Jonathan thanked her, but his eyes flicked to the elevator, worry etched in his features. He ushered Elizabeth into his private office, quickly closing the door behind them. "Listen," he said, clearing his throat. "Vanessa is just a consultant we hired. She's helping us with some brand strategies for our new project. She can be a bit intense, but she's good at her job." Elizabeth nodded, forcing a smile. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him for the sake of their unborn child, but her instincts screamed otherwise. There was something too familiar about the way Vanessa had looked at her, something that suggested a deep personal involvement with Jonathan. Days later, Elizabeth confided in a close friend, Margaret Turner, a counselor at the youth center. "I'm worried," she admitted, tears brimming. "I can't shake the feeling Something is going on between Jonathan and that woman. Margaret listened intently, her warm eyes full of empathy. Have you considered talking to a marriage counselor, Liz? Sometimes an unbiased professional can help clarify these feelings. Elizabeth nodded. She wanted to do everything she could to save her marriage. But deep down, she feared that if her suspicions proved correct, it would shatter her. That night, she laid awake again, her hand cradling her belly, silently praying for strength. Meanwhile, Jonathan's affair with Vanessa grew bolder. She peppered him with texts and calls at all hours, urging him to break away from his dull domestic life and claim the life he deserved. One morning, Jonathan awoke to an email containing explicit photos she'd sent, with a suggestive line hinting at how he should spend his next business trip. In the midst of all this, Elizabeth discovered she'd been accepted into a specialized prenatal program for couples aimed at teaching mindfulness and stress reduction techniques. Excited, she broached the subject with Jonathan, hoping he'd see it as a chance to reconnect before the baby arrived. He agreed to attend one session, if only to appease her. During that session, the counselor asked them to face each other, place a hand on each other's heart, and express gratitude for the little things. Elizabeth's eyes misted when she spoke about how Jonathan's success had given her the resources to help more people. Jonathan mumbled about being grateful for Elizabeth's support, but the sincerity was hollow, his gaze flicking away when her tears fell. As they left, Elizabeth felt more alone than ever. The cracks in their marriage had grown into a chasm, and Elizabeth, with her heart on the line and a child in her womb, began to realize she might be fighting a losing battle. Yet, she wasn't one to surrender easily. With every breath, she reminded herself of the life inside her, of the love she once shared with Jonathan. She clung to hope, even as the specter of betrayal loomed larger by the day. Vanessa Reeves had an agenda far more calculated than Jonathan realized. She was well aware of Elizabeth's pregnancy. News traveled quickly in social circles, especially when the father was a high-profile millionaire. While Jonathan saw their affair as a thrilling escape, Vanessa saw a jackpot. She'd dated wealthy men before, but none with Jonathan's clout or potential. She wanted to secure her position in his life, and more importantly, in his bank accounts. She began with small manipulations. Whenever Jonathan expressed concern about his wife's well-being, Vanessa subtly mocked Elizabeth's fragile state, suggesting that perhaps Elizabeth wasn't strong enough to be the partner he needed. She never outright told him to leave his wife. Instead, she planted seeds of doubt, letting them take root in Jonathan's mind. To further entangle him, she proposed that he invest in an exclusive real estate venture she was supposedly helping spearhead. Promising massive returns, she dangled the prospect of prestige and influence. Just imagine, she purred into his ear one evening at a penthouse party, you and I at the top of this city's social ladder, owning prime blocks of property, shaping the skyline. It's everything you've worked for, Jonathan. The dream she painted was irresistible to a man addicted to success. Still, Vanessa sensed that Jonathan hesitated, chained by guilt and a sense of obligation to his pregnant wife. So, she upped her game. She made sure her presence was felt in every facet of his life. She'd show up unexpectedly at his office with lunch, always dressed in a way that made heads turn. She emailed him detailed breakdowns of her business idea, ensuring he saw how much she'd done just for him. During late-night rendezvous, she lavished him with praise, making him feel like an unstoppable force. Even Jonathan's business partners began to notice the shift. A few discreetly cautioned him about getting too involved, But he was too far gone in his double life. He wanted Vanessa's excitement, her audacious energy, yet he also wanted to maintain the respectability of his marriage, particularly with a child on the way. He assured himself that he could handle it. Elizabeth, meanwhile, was retreating into her own silent world of heartbreak. She hardly recognized the man Jonathan was becoming, but she still clung to the dream of a happy family. In her quiet moments, she collected her thoughts, writing in a journal about her hopes for the baby and the love she once felt from Jonathan. If he would just snap out of it, she told herself, everything could be saved. A turning point came when Vanessa managed to corner Elizabeth at a charity event. Elizabeth was volunteering as part of the youth center's fundraising committee, helping set up tables and greeting donors. Vanessa arrived on Jonathan's arm, wearing a figure-hugging red dress. Publicly, she was introduced simply as a colleague, but the knowing looks between them told Elizabeth everything. Jonathan barely spoke to Elizabeth the whole night, preoccupied with parading Vanessa among wealthy benefactors, forging new connections. At one point, Elizabeth found herself alone in a hallway, gathering her composure. That's when Vanessa materialized like a phantom. She leaned against the wall, a smirk playing on her glossy lips. "I've heard you're expecting soon," Vanessa said. "Must be nice to know that Jonathan's going to be a father. He's great with children, isn't he?" The question dripped with insinuation. Elizabeth's chest tightened. "Yes, he'll be a wonderful father," she replied, forcing a polite tone, despite the anger burning inside her. Vanessa's expression was smug, practically victorious. "Well, I hope you're taking good care of yourself. Stress isn't good for the baby." With that, she sauntered off, leaving Elizabeth trembling. In the car ride home, Elizabeth confronted Jonathan through tears, asking him outright if he was having an affair. He denied it vehemently, raising his voice in an uncharacteristic outburst. "Why must you always assume the worst?" he snapped, ignoring the tear-streaked look of betrayal on her face. "Vanessa is a critical part of our new marketing push. You have no idea how business works." Elizabeth withdrew, hugging her belly protectively. She realized that no matter how much she wanted to fix things, Jonathan was spiraling into a world that had no space for her. Yet, there was a spark of determination left. If Jonathan was slipping away, she would fight to preserve her dignity, even if it meant letting him go. Unbeknownst to both of them, Vanessa had more tricks up her sleeve. She wasn't satisfied just being the mistress. She craved legitimacy, adoration, and the glittering promise of marriage. And in her mind, she had already begun orchestrating the downfall of Elizabeth Harrington. It was late November when Jonathan received a cryptic message from Vanessa. "We need to talk, urgent." He glanced at the text, nerves on edge, wondering if she was about to drop a bombshell. Perhaps a pregnancy scare, or maybe some business deal gone awry. He left his office early to meet her at a discreet lounge a few blocks away. Vanessa arrived wearing a long trench coat, cinched at the waist, her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses. She slipped into the booth across from him and ordered a glass of Merlot. Without preamble, she began, "Jonathan, I'm tired of playing second fiddle. We need to make a decision about us." Alarm bells rang in Jonathan's mind. He sipped his whiskey, trying to project calm. "What do you mean?" "I've given you every opportunity to be happy," she said, her gaze unwavering. "And yet, you're still going home to Elizabeth. She's pregnant, sure, but be honest with yourself. Are you truly in love with her?" Jonathan exhaled, feeling cornered. He couldn't deny his passion for Vanessa, yet he also couldn't sever the bond with his wife, especially with a baby on the way. It was as if he stood on a precarious cliff, the slightest push sending him tumbling into an abyss. "This is complicated," he managed. "I do care about Elizabeth. She's the mother of my child." Vanessa sneered, her composure cracking. "Care about her all you want, Jonathan, but that won't change the fact that we have something real. And if you're not going to make it official, I might have to look elsewhere." The threat hung in the air like poison. He should have walked away then. But instead, he found himself apologizing, trying to placate her. The conversation ended with a promise that he'd sort out his marital issues soon. That night, he stared at Elizabeth, asleep in their bed, her hand protectively over her belly. Guilt and longing warred in his mind. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was not as naive as Jonathan assumed. She'd hired a private investigator, a middle-aged ex-cop named Walter Green, who discreetly followed Jonathan's movements. Within a week, Walter delivered photographs, Jonathan and Vanessa entering a hotel lobby, leaving hand in hand, sharing an intimate moment in the car. The evidence was damning. Heart-pounding, Elizabeth spread the photos across her kitchen table. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to give in to despair. She was pregnant, vulnerable, but she was not powerless. She consulted a divorce lawyer recommended by Margaret. The lawyer suggested she gather more evidence before filing. If Jonathan was going to betray her, at least she would secure her child's future. Jonathan's phone buzzed continuously with Vanessa's messages. Some nights, he escaped to Vanessa's penthouse. Others, he stayed at the office, burying himself in spreadsheets and mergers to numb the guilt. His company's board members were beginning to talk. Even his longtime friend and financial advisor, Daniel Wu, took him aside one day. "Whatever's going on in your personal life, get it under control," Daniel warned, "or you'll lose everything you've built." But Jonathan was too entangled in Vanessa's web. Each time he tried to break it off, she'd reel him back with promises or threats. She'd whisper about the incredible future they could share, while also reminding him of how easily she could create a scandal that would ruin him. Stuck in a vortex of lust, ambition, and fear, Jonathan pushed forward as if by inertia. At home, Elizabeth continued to play the dutiful wife, cooking dinners that he rarely touched, updating him on doctor visits he never attended. A new routine set in. He'd mumble excuses. She'd pretend to believe them, all while carefully gathering evidence. She knew confronting him outright would only make him defensive. Patience, she realized, could be her greatest weapon. The tension weighed heavily in the mansion's air. Servants walked on eggshells, noticing the forced smiles, the stony silences. Friends saw less and less of the couple socially, as invitations were often extended to Jonathan plus Vanessa instead of Jonathan and Elizabeth. The dream life they had flaunted for magazines was collapsing, brick by brick. And yet beneath Elizabeth's heartbreak lay a resolute core of strength. She had a child to protect, and she refused to be cast aside without a fight. Even if it meant letting Jonathan go, she'd do it on her own terms. Little did Jonathan realize the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The day Elizabeth would finally stand tall, unveiling truth after truth, and leaving him utterly shell-shocked by the consequences of his betrayal. By the time Elizabeth reached her 8th month of pregnancy, she had all the evidence she needed. The private investigator's photos, phone records linking Jonathan and Vanessa's clandestine meetups, even eyewitness accounts from a few hotel staff who recognized Jonathan. The heartbreak was immense, but Elizabeth channeled her pain into a clear focus: protect herself and her unborn child. One winter evening, she prepared a special dinner at home. She set the table elegantly, placing 2 tall candles in the center. She wore a simple but graceful maternity dress that accentuated her rounded belly. When Jonathan walked in, his tie loose, coat hung over his arm, he paused at the sight of the well-set table. "What's all this?" he asked warily. Elizabeth forced a smile, pushing past the hurt lodged in her chest. "I thought we should have a conversation over dinner." He nodded, trying to recall the last time they'd had a civil meal together. They sat, clinking glasses of sparkling water. The tension in the air was thick, as Elizabeth served them grilled salmon with lemon butter sauce. After a few bites, she said quietly, "Jonathan, I know about Vanessa." She spoke the name plainly, without drama. He nearly choked on his fish, color draining from his face. "Liz, let me explain," he began, but she raised a hand to stop him. She wasn't interested in excuses. Elizabeth pulled out a folder containing the evidence. She handed it to him, her eyes unwavering. "I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm prepared to file for divorce." Jonathan thumbed through the pages, his face contorting into shock and guilt. "You hired someone to follow me?" he asked, half angry, half astonished. "I did what I had to do," she said. "You lied to me for months. You flaunted that woman in public. And I may have a child to raise soon, our child, but that doesn't mean I'll tolerate disrespect or betrayal." Jonathan swallowed hard, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. Part of him wanted to apologize, to plead for forgiveness. But another part, the side influenced by Vanessa's cunning whispers, told him not to show weakness. "Look, Elizabeth, I'm sorry you found out this way. But you have to understand, our marriage hasn't exactly been perfect." Elizabeth's voice trembled only slightly as she cut him off. "Is that supposed to be an excuse?" She let out a shaky breath, placing a protective hand on her belly. "I'm giving you a choice. We can go through with the divorce, or we can try to work on our marriage. But if we try to work on it, you have to end all contact with Vanessa, immediately, irrevocably, and you have to seek counseling with me. Otherwise, I file the papers." Jonathan hesitated, remembering Vanessa's ultimatum and her repeated promises of a thrilling future. He also recognized the gravity of Elizabeth's request. She was his wife, the mother of his child, the woman who had stood by him when he was nobody. But the hold Vanessa had on him was strong, and the idea of losing that rush felt suffocating. "I need time to think," he stammered. He could see the disappointment flicker across Elizabeth's face. Nonetheless, she simply nodded, tears threatening to spill over, and stood from the table. "You have 1 week," she said softly. "By then, I'll expect your decision." With that, she turned and headed upstairs, leaving her untouched dinner plate on the table. That night, Jonathan slept in his study, too conflicted to face his pregnant wife. He tossed and turned on the leather couch, phone in hand, scrolling through messages from Vanessa, reading the latest property deal she dangled in front of him. He thought about his unborn child, the empire he had built, and the public scandal this would unleash if he went through with a divorce. Stress consumed him, as did a gnawing fear of losing everything. 3 days later, he still hadn't given Elizabeth his decision. Instead, he met Vanessa at a secluded bar, telling her about Elizabeth's ultimatum. "I can't keep living like this," he admitted, frustration clouding his features. Vanessa's response was immediate. "Leave her. You said it yourself. The marriage is basically over. Why not finalize it? We can go public and shape a narrative that suits us." She pinned him with a direct stare, then added, "I can give you a life that Elizabeth never could. You know that." In the haze of whiskey and Vanessa's unwavering gaze, Jonathan agreed. He'd divorce Elizabeth. He found himself rationalizing it. Better to end it cleanly than drag out a dead marriage. And he was certain Vanessa was the more exciting choice. "I'll talk to my lawyer," he muttered, ignoring the pang of sorrow in his chest. Soon after, Elizabeth received the news in the form of a curt conversation with Jonathan. He stood rigid, telling her he wanted a divorce. She didn't scream or cry in front of him. She simply listened, nodded, and retreated to the bedroom. Only when she was alone did she allow tears to flow, sobs racking her body as she held her pregnant belly, murmuring apologies to her unborn child for the broken home it would enter. Little did Jonathan realize, the divorce would not be the final act. Instead, it would be the opening scene of a drama that would twist in ways none of them expected, especially on the day he pledged himself to Vanessa, while Elizabeth remained in the shadows, holding on to an explosive truth. The news of Jonathan and Elizabeth's divorce spread like wildfire through high society circles. Gossip columnists had a field day. Millionaire dumps pregnant wife for sultry mistress. While Jonathan tried to manage the narrative, Vanessa embraced the attention, orchestrating exclusive interviews that portrayed their relationship as fated and irresistible. She even hinted that the timing of Elizabeth's pregnancy had been an attempt to cling to a failing marriage, which only fueled tabloid speculation. Elizabeth retreated from the public eye. She needed to focus on her health and the babies. A few close friends rallied around her, offering emotional support and discreet legal advice. But she remained stoic. She refused to beg Jonathan to stay or to make a spectacle of herself in the media. She allowed her lawyers to handle most of the negotiations, ensuring she and her child would be financially stable once the divorce was finalized. In a matter of weeks, the divorce went through, astonishingly quick for such a high-profile couple. Money and influence smoothed out the usual bureaucratic hurdles. Jonathan's team spun the story as a mutual decision, but the tabloids screamed otherwise. Elizabeth's lawyer secured a hefty settlement package, but the heartbreak overshadowed any material gain. Jonathan had barely signed the final documents when Vanessa insisted on a destination wedding. She was hungry for the spotlight and wanted to prove her status as the new Mrs. Harrington. They chose Lake Como, Italy, for its picturesque scenery, renting out a luxurious villa perched on the water's edge. High-profile guests received elaborate invitations embossed with gold leaf. Celebrities, business moguls, and socialites from across Europe and America flew in. Cameras clicked incessantly, capturing Vanessa in a stunning designer gown as she made her grand entrance. Jonathan stood at the altar, looking dapper in a custom-tailored tux. He tried to focus on the moment, ignoring the pang of regret that flickered whenever he thought of Elizabeth. He reassured himself that this was his fresh start, a leap toward a more exciting life. Vanessa glided down the aisle, her smile wide and triumphant. The ceremony was lavish. Flowers imported from Holland, a string quartet flown in from Vienna, champagne from the finest vineyards in France. It was everything Vanessa had dreamed of. Back in the States, Elizabeth watched the headlines in quiet resignation. She was close to her due date and decided not to dwell on Jonathan's public spectacle. Her child's health and her own peace of mind were her priorities. Besides, she had uncovered something that would turn this entire narrative on its head. Vanessa was not who she claimed to be. With the help of Walter Green, the private investigator, Elizabeth had discovered a tangled web of forged documents, shell companies, and bankrupt accounts linked to Vanessa Reeves. It appeared Vanessa had orchestrated elaborate cons on past lovers, siphoning money through dubious real estate deals and marketing ventures. Several of Vanessa's former associates had been swindled, some too ashamed to go public. But now, Elizabeth had a folder of evidence that threatened to expose Vanessa as a fraud. Elizabeth decided to hold on to that folder for the moment, letting the wedding spectacle unfold. She sensed that unveiling the truth at the right time could ensure that Jonathan wouldn't weasel out of his responsibilities as a father. Moreover, she felt it was better for him to discover Vanessa's true nature when he was at his most complacent. After all, if he was brazen enough to marry his mistress immediately after divorcing her while she was still pregnant, perhaps he deserved the harsh lesson fate was about to deliver. And so, in Italy, under the shimmering lights of a grand villa, Jonathan said, "I do," to Vanessa. They exchanged vows in front of a cheering crowd. A high-profile priest, flown in just for the occasion, declared them man and wife. Fireworks lit the night sky, champagne flowed freely, and paparazzi snapped countless pictures for the gossip magazines to devour. But as Jonathan and Vanessa shared their first dance, a quiet storm was brewing thousands of miles away. It was a storm named Elizabeth, carrying the knowledge of Vanessa's lies like a secret weapon. At home in her modest bedroom, Elizabeth held a copy of the evidence in her hands. She gently set it aside, placed a hand on her very pregnant belly, and smiled, a small, knowing smile. She knew the wedding was only an intermission, not the end of the story, and when the final act played out, Vanessa Reeves would wish she had never underestimated the woman she tried so hard to destroy. Elizabeth went into labor a month after Jonathan's grand Italian wedding. She found herself in a private hospital suite, courtesy of the settlement from the divorce. Even though she was alone, except for a few close friends, she felt a surge of both fear and exhilaration. This child would be her anchor, the one pure thing born from a turbulent marriage. Complications arose during labor, prompting an emergency C-section. Margaret Turner clutched Elizabeth's hand as medical staff wheeled her into surgery. Hours later, a healthy baby boy was delivered, and Elizabeth breathed a sigh of relief. She named him James Douglas Harrington, honoring her family name and acknowledging his father's lineage. Jonathan learned of his son's birth through social media. Distorted rumors claimed Elizabeth was in critical condition, though that wasn't true. Still, guilt stabbed at him for not being there. Vanessa suggested he send flowers or a polite message. After all, she rationalized, we don't want the media to think you're a deadbeat dad. But a part of Jonathan insisted on visiting in person, if only to see his child. He arrived at the hospital the next evening, hoping to avoid the paparazzi. Dressed in a discreet hoodie and sunglasses, he found Elizabeth's private room. She was sitting up in bed, cradling tiny James in her arms. The boy's delicate features stirred something in Jonathan, a flicker of paternal love he hadn't expected to feel so strongly. For a few moments, he stood silently, absorbing the sight of his newborn son and the serene strength in Elizabeth's face. Elizabeth acknowledged him with a nod. "You can hold him," she said softly, offering the baby. Jonathan hesitated before gently taking James, supporting his head as he gazed down at his child. A wave of emotion washed over him, momentarily dissolving the tension between them. "How are you?" he asked, voice shaky with genuine concern. Elizabeth nodded. "Tired, but relieved. He's healthy. That's all that matters." A tense silence followed. Then Elizabeth cleared her throat. "Jonathan, you should know. There are things about Vanessa you aren't aware of." He frowned, stiffening. "She's my wife now, Elizabeth. I'm not sure I want to hear." Elizabeth held up a hand. "Listen to me. I have proof she's been running cons under multiple aliases for years. She's scammed people out of thousands, maybe millions of dollars. She's not the woman you think she is." Jonathan glared, torn between anger and confusion. "Is this some ploy to ruin my marriage?" he snapped. Elizabeth sighed, stroking James's tiny fingers. "Why would I lie? She's done more harm to you than you realize. Check her financial records. Talk to the people she's scammed. Don't let her drag you into legal or financial ruin." Before Jonathan could respond, the door swung open, revealing Vanessa herself. Decked in designer clothes, she looked thoroughly out of place in the hospital corridor. Her expression soured when she saw Jonathan cradling his son. She quickly recovered, turning to Elizabeth. "I heard you were here," she said coldly, "so I came to see if everything was all right." Elizabeth offered a tight smile. "We're fine," she replied, glancing at Vanessa's manicured nails. "Thanks for your concern." Vanessa's eyes flitted to the baby. "So, that's James, I suppose?" She managed a lukewarm smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jonathan found himself shifting uncomfortably, the baby still in his arms. The tension in the room was palpable. Sensing an impending confrontation, Elizabeth's doctor walked in, checking on the new mother. "The baby should get some rest," the doctor advised, ushering Vanessa and Jonathan toward the hallway. Once outside, Vanessa attempted to link her arm through Jonathan's. "Let's go. We should get a drink and talk." But he pulled away, mind still grappling with Elizabeth's words. "Give me a moment," he mumbled, pacing near the wall. Vanessa shot him an icy stare. "Don't tell me you believe her lies. She's desperate to paint me as some villain. She's threatened by our marriage." Jonathan didn't respond immediately. A swirl of doubt had already formed. The problem was, deep down, he knew Elizabeth was not the type to spin elaborate falsehoods. She was the woman who had always been straightforward, sometimes painfully so. "I need proof," he finally said to Vanessa. "Show me your financials. Put my mind at ease." Vanessa's face blanched, but she recovered swiftly. "What do you think this is, an interrogation?" she hissed. "I'm your wife. You're supposed to trust me." "Trust is earned," he shot back, surprising even himself. "If you have nothing to hide, you'll show me." Vanessa's lips tightened in anger. Without another word, she stormed off down the hallway, leaving Jonathan behind, torn between the newborn son he felt drawn to and the woman he had chosen in a haze of infatuation. If Elizabeth's allegations were true, his entire world was about to explode. And if they were false, he risked alienating his new wife. Caught in the middle, Jonathan could only stare at the hospital corridor, uncertain which direction to follow, and which choice would haunt him more. After leaving the hospital, Jonathan found himself haunted by Elizabeth's revelations about Vanessa. He pushed for answers, combing through public records and discreetly checking with his legal team. At first, they uncovered nothing alarming, mostly because Vanessa had been careful. But a few well-placed phone calls to her supposed real estate partners yielded conflicting stories. Some claimed never to have heard of her. Others said she'd disappeared after complicated deals. The puzzle pieces began to align. Meanwhile, Vanessa caught wind of Jonathan's sleuthing and retaliated. She insisted he sign power of attorney forms, allowing her to handle some upcoming investments, framing it as a way to simplify his busy schedule. When he hesitated, she raged, throwing accusations and threats. "You don't trust me," she shouted one evening in their opulent living room. "Why did you marry me if you can't give me the freedom to help run our affairs?" Jonathan's patience wore thin. "I married you because I thought we had something special," he retorted. "Now I'm not so sure." Her eyes flashed with hatred. She stormed off, slamming the door, and didn't return that night. But Jonathan wasn't alone. He spent hours calling contacts and scanning financial statements. The deeper he dug, the clearer the picture became. Vanessa was a fraud, a con artist who specialized in ensnaring wealthy men. During this tumultuous period, Elizabeth settled into motherhood, focusing on baby James. Despite her heartbreak, she found profound joy in caring for her son. Late-night feedings and lullabies replaced the noise of tabloids and gossip. She made a point of never speaking ill of Jonathan to James, and she filed away the heartbreak in a locked chamber of her heart. When she felt strong enough, she instructed her lawyer to finalize the custody and visitation terms with Jonathan's legal team. She wanted James to know his father, provided Jonathan could be responsible. One afternoon, a courier arrived at Elizabeth's door with an envelope addressed to her. She opened it carefully, finding a thick wad of legal documents from Jonathan's lawyer. At the top was a note scribbled by Jonathan himself. "Elizabeth, I owe you an apology. You were right about Vanessa. Please look at these documents. I want to ensure James and you are protected. Let's discuss custody arrangements in person." Jonathan skimming through the pages, Elizabeth learned that Jonathan had begun divorce proceedings against Vanessa, citing fraud and emotional distress. He was also reorganizing his assets to ensure Vanessa couldn't claim a share of his core business holdings. A sense of relief washed over her, knowing that the truth was finally emerging. But it wasn't over yet. Vanessa unleashed a final hailstorm of vengeance once she realized Jonathan planned to divorce her. She went public with salacious tales, painting Jonathan as an abusive manipulator who had cast her aside. She threatened to sue for a massive alimony settlement, claiming she'd given up her career to be at his side. She even claimed to be pregnant, though nobody could verify it. The tabloids ate it up, and Jonathan's reputation wavered. His shareholders grew anxious. The stock price for one of his newer ventures dipped. That was the moment Elizabeth decided to act. She might have moved on from Jonathan romantically, but she had no desire to watch him be destroyed, especially when it might hurt her son's future. She reached out to a trusted journalist, Sarah Donovan, an old acquaintance who had interviewed Jonathan years ago. Elizabeth handed over the files incriminating Vanessa, the forged signatures, the false business claims, testimonies from past victims. She explained the entire sordid saga on the condition that Sarah would wait for court validation before publishing. In a high-stakes courtroom showdown, Jonathan's legal team presented overwhelming evidence against Vanessa. Lawyers brought forth witnesses, former partners, private investigators who spoke of her deceitful tactics. Financial forensics revealed shell corporations used to launder stolen funds. Each exhibit was a nail in the coffin of Vanessa's carefully curated image. Furious, Vanessa screeched about defamation and sabotage, but the judge found her statements inconsistent and her credibility in tatters. When the final gavel struck, the court ruled in Jonathan's favor. The marriage was declared null due to fraudulent circumstances. Vanessa was ordered to pay restitution for any assets proven to be stolen or misrepresented. As she was escorted out by court security, the paparazzi captured her meltdown, eyes wild, hair disheveled, cursing Jonathan and Elizabeth in a venomous tirade. The next day's headlines read, "Fraudulent Mistress Exposed, Jonathan Harrington Free of Con Artist Bride." For Jonathan, the aftermath was a bitter relief. He had lost credibility in many circles, but the truth had come out. He also realized the depth of the pain he'd inflicted on Elizabeth. After the dust settled, he called her and asked to see baby James. She agreed to a meeting at a cozy cafe near the hospital where James was born. When Jonathan arrived, he found Elizabeth waiting with James dozing in a stroller. The hush of the cafe and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee gave the encounter a subdued warmth. Jonathan quietly sat across from Elizabeth, eyes dropping to the baby. Guilt and regret lined his face. "How is he?" Jonathan asked, voice thick. Elizabeth smiled gently. "He's thriving, growing so quickly. He'll be crawling before we know it." Jonathan swallowed hard, guilt flooding him. "Liz, I'm sorry. I can't say it enough. I was a fool." She studied him for a moment, then reached out to pat his hand. "Our marriage is over, Jonathan," she said, her tone honest, yet not unkind. "But that doesn't mean we can't work together to raise our son." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "Thank you for standing up for me in court. You could have let Vanessa destroy me." Elizabeth shook her head. "I did it for James. He deserves a future where his father isn't tied up in lawsuits and scandal. And part of me still respects the good man you used to be." Jonathan exhaled, relief and sorrow mingling. "I want to be that man again," he whispered, gently brushing his fingers over James's tiny hand. They spent the next hour discussing visitation schedules, financial planning for James's education, and how to navigate co-parenting. It wasn't an easy conversation. Emotions simmered beneath the surface: love, betrayal, regret. But there was also a mutual desire to provide the best life for their child. By the time they parted ways, Elizabeth felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They weren't returning to the life they had, but they were forging a new path, one grounded in honesty, if not love. Jonathan watched them go, a swirl of regret and admiration filling his heart. He knew he'd forever be marked by the choice he made to chase a fleeting thrill with Vanessa. And Elizabeth, for her part, walked away with her head held high, proud of the grace she maintained in the face of heartbreak. The next morning, newspapers displayed photos of a distraught Vanessa leaving the courthouse, overshadowed by articles praising Elizabeth's quiet dignity. Tabloid interest soon shifted to other scandals, leaving Jonathan and Elizabeth to navigate their complicated new reality in relative peace. Thus ended the whirlwind saga of betrayal, heartbreak, and deceit. Jonathan Harrington, once seduced by the allure of a cunning mistress, emerged bruised but wiser. Elizabeth, his pregnant wife left smiling on divorce day, had always known the truth, that Vanessa was a fraud waiting to be exposed. She stood her ground, protected her child, and refused to be a victim. In the end, Jonathan and Elizabeth found an uneasy truce, both determined to raise baby James in a stable environment. Their story became a cautionary tale, proving that no amount of wealth or glamour can mask a guilty conscience or hide deception forever.
What if the man you built a life with, the father of your child, dismissed your entire existence with 7 soul-crushing words? For Elena, a trip to the bank with her husband Richard and their 5-year-old son Leo turned into a public nightmare. In front of a stranger, Richard didn't just deny their marriage, he reduced her to a biological function. "She's not my wife," he said with chilling indifference, "just a surrogate." That single sentence ignited a firestorm, a battle for her identity, her dignity, and her son. This is the story of how a mother's love, pushed to the brink, proved that she was anything but just a surrogate. It's the story of how that night the man who denied her lost everything. The air in the downtown branch of Sterling National Bank was cool and sterile, smelling faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and old money. It was a place of hushed transactions and quiet importance, the kind of establishment Richard Vance felt perfectly at home in. For Elena, it always felt like she was an actress on a set she hadn't been properly briefed for. She smoothed down the skirt of her simple but elegant navy dress, a nervous habit she'd developed over 7 years of marriage to a man born into a world of casual opulence. Their son Leo, a boisterous 5-year-old with Richard's dark hair and her bright, curious eyes, was starting to squirm. "Mommy, can I have a lollipop? Mr. Henderson has a jar." "We'll see, sweetie," Elena murmured, tucking a stray curl behind his ear. "Let's just finish up with Daddy." Richard wasn't paying attention. He was scrolling through his phone, his thumb flicking impatiently across the screen. He hadn't wanted to come. "It's just opening a trust account for Leo's education, Elena. The advisors can handle it." But Elena had insisted. She believed in doing these things as a family, in creating small, shared traditions out of life's milestones, even the boring ones. She felt the glue that held them together, a bond more essential than the Vance family fortune. Lately, she'd felt that glue beginning to lose its hold. They were finally called to a polished mahogany desk where a kind-faced middle-aged clerk named Brenda was waiting. Her nameplate was positioned neatly beside a computer monitor. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, I'm Brenda. So pleased to meet you," she said with a warm smile, her eyes crinkling. "And who is this handsome young man?" "I'm Leo," their son announced, puffing out his chest. Brenda chuckled. "Well, Leo, it's a pleasure. We're just setting up a little nest egg for you today." Richard gave a perfunctory nod, still more engaged with his phone than the human beings in front of him. Elena's smile felt brittle. She handled the initial pleasantries, her voice a soft counterpoint to the clacking of Brenda's keyboard. They went through the paperwork, a blizzard of numbers and legal jargon. Elena signed where indicated, her hand flowing in the practice script of Elena Vance. Finally, Brenda turned to a particular form. "All right, just a few final details. This is our family legacy package, which links all of your accounts and offers certain benefits. I just need to confirm the primary and secondary account holders. So Mr. Vance and Mrs. Vance," she gestured towards Elena, "as his wife and the mother of the child." Richard looked up from his phone, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if Brenda had asked a particularly stupid question. He let out a short, dismissive sound that was not quite a laugh. "Oh," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet bank. "She's not my wife." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Elena's heart stopped. She stared at Richard, her mind refusing to process the statement. She could feel Brenda's professional smile falter, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Leo, sensing the sudden sharp shift in the emotional atmosphere, looked from his father to his mother. Brenda, ever the professional, tried to recover. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I must have misunderstood the—" Richard cut her off, waving a dismissive hand towards Elena without even looking at her. The gesture was like one you'd use to point out a piece of furniture. "She's just the surrogate." Just. The. Surrogate. 7 words. 7 words that vaporized 7 years of marriage, a decade of shared life, the agony of infertility, the miracle of a successful IVF transfer, and 9 months of carrying their son under her own heart. Each word was a perfectly polished stone dropped into the placid pool of her life, and the ripples were devastating. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. The hushed whispers of the bank seemed to amplify into a roar in her ears. She wasn't Mrs. Vance. She wasn't a partner. She wasn't the woman he loved. She was a vessel, an incubator, a service provider, and he had just announced it to a complete stranger with the same casual air he might use to say, "She's just here to fix the air conditioning." Brenda's face was a mask of horrified pity. She looked at Elena, then at Richard, then down at the paperwork, her hands hovering uselessly over the keyboard. The space for wife's signature seemed to mock Elena from the page. "I see," Brenda stammered, her gaze fixed firmly on her monitor. Leo tugged on Elena's sleeve. "Mommy, what's a surrogate?" Elena couldn't breathe. She couldn't form a word. She looked at Richard, her eyes pleading with him to take it back, to laugh and say it was a bizarre, terrible joke, But he was already looking back down at his phone, his face a mask of cold indifference. He had said it and he meant it. He had erased her. Slowly, deliberately, Elena stood up. The movement felt heavy, as if she were wading through water. She took Leo's small hand in hers. Her own hand was ice cold. "Come on, Leo," she said, her voice a raw, shaky whisper. "We're leaving." She didn't look at Richard. She couldn't. If she looked at him, she knew she would either shatter into a million pieces or do something she would regret. She walked away from the mahogany desk past the questioning glances of other patrons, her son trotting to keep up. "But what about my lollipop?" Leo asked, his voice full of a child's innocent confusion. "I'll buy you a whole bag, my love," Elena promised, her voice breaking on the last word. The automatic glass doors slid open and the humid city air hit her like a physical blow. She didn't stop walking until she reached their car, a sleek black Mercedes that suddenly felt like a cage. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so violently she could barely fit the key in the door. She buckled a chattering Leo into his car seat, her movements jerky and robotic. She got into the driver's seat and just sat there gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. A pale, hollow-eyed stranger stared back. A few minutes later, Richard slid into the passenger seat, smelling of expensive cologne and oblivious self-importance. "What was that all about?" he asked, his tone laced with irritation. "You caused a scene, Elena." The dam broke. "I caused a scene?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage so profound it scared her. "You publicly disowned me, Richard. You dismissed me as if I were nothing more than a hired womb." He actually had the audacity to scoff. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It was a legal distinction. With my family's assets, everything has to be precise. You know Mother worries about these things. Calling you the surrogate is just factually accurate from a certain legal perspective." "A legal perspective," she repeated, her voice rising. "I am your wife. I am the mother of your child. I carried him. I gave birth to him. We have a marriage certificate. We have a life. Or did I imagine all of that?" "Of course you didn't imagine it," he said, finally looking at her, but his eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth she once cherished. "But you know the arrangement was always unorthodox. You know my mother, the family. They see things a certain way. It was just simpler to clarify." Simpler. It was simpler to gut her in public than to stand up to his mother. Simpler to reduce her to a biological function than to call her his wife. The drive home was a silent, suffocating ordeal. Leo, sensing the storm, had fallen asleep in the back, his head lolled to one side. Elena drove on autopilot, her mind a maelstrom of memories, their wedding day. Richard's tearful joy when the IVF finally worked his hand on her swollen belly, the moment he'd first held Leo in the hospital, whispering, thank you, my love." Where was that man? Who was this cold, callous stranger sitting beside her? They arrived at their large, impeccably decorated house in a wealthy suburb, a house that now felt like a gilded cage built by his family's money, not their shared love. Richard got out of the car and went inside without a backward glance, expecting her to unbuckle Leo and follow meekly behind. But Elena didn't move. She sat in the silence of the garage, the only sound the soft ticking of the cooling engine. She looked back at her sleeping son, his face so peaceful and innocent. He deserved a mother who was respected. He deserved a father who honored his mother. He deserved more than a life built on a foundation of legal distinctions and subservience to a cruel, calculating matriarch. Richard thought his words in the bank were just a clarification, an insignificant detail. He was wrong. They were a declaration of war. And in that moment, sitting in the sterile silence of her garage, Elena knew something with absolute certainty. This was not a scene she was causing. This was the end of the play. That night, after Richard had gone to sleep in their master bedroom, assuming her silence was acceptance, Elena moved with a quiet, determined fury. She packed 3 suitcases, 1 for her, 2 for Leo. Clothes, toys, his favorite blanket, the worn copy of Goodnight Moon. She took her laptop, her personal documents, and the photo albums, the tangible proof of the life he had just denied. She drained half the funds from their joint checking account, the one she had access to, transferring it to her personal savings. At 2 a.m., she slipped into Leo's room. She gently woke him, whispering, "Hey, sleepyhead, we're going on a little adventure, just you and me." Leo, groggy and compliant, let her dress him and lead him downstairs. As she passed the closed door to the master bedroom, she paused. There was no anger left, just a vast, cold emptiness. He hadn't just lost a wife tonight. He had lost the respect, the love, and the life they had built. She buckled Leo into the car, his suitcases tucked beside him. As she pulled out of the driveway, she didn't look back. She was driving away from the house, from the Vance name, from the man who called her a surrogate. She was driving toward an uncertain future, but for the first time in a very long time, she felt like more than just Mrs. Vance. She felt like Elena, and she had her son. That was all that mattered. The battle had just begun, and Richard had no idea of the power of the woman he had just so carelessly discarded. The headlights of Elena's car cut through the pre-dawn gloom, illuminating the quiet tree-lined street where Chloe lived. Chloe's small, charming bungalow, with its overflowing flower boxes and brightly painted door, was more than just a house. It was Elena's sanctuary. Chloe had been her best friend since college, her maid of honor, her confidant through the brutal years of fertility treatments, and the first person after Richard to hold Leo. When Elena called her from a gas station at 3 a.m., her voice a ragged whisper, Chloe hadn't hesitated. "Don't say another word. I have the spare key under the ceramic frog. The guest room is ready. Just get here." Now, as Elena carried a sleeping Leo from the car, the front door swung open. Chloe, her fiery red hair a mess, and a thick robe tied hastily around her, enveloped them both in a fierce hug. "Get him inside," Chloe murmured, her voice thick with a mixture of sleep and concern. She took one of the suitcases, and together they settled Leo into the guest room bed, tucking him in without waking him. In the cozy, cluttered kitchen, over steaming mugs of chamomile tea, the story poured out of Elena. She recounted the scene at the bank, Richard's dismissive tone, the look on the clerk's face, his pathetic justification in the car. With each word, Chloe's expression hardened from sympathy to a cold, controlled fury. "He said what?" Chloe finally managed to say, her knuckles white around her mug. "That son of a bitch. After everything, after all those injections, the procedures, the miscarriages. For him to reduce you to that, in public. He said it was a legal distinction." Elena choked out the words, tasting like ash. "For his mother. It was always for his mother, Chloe. I was never good enough for the great Eleanor Vance. Not the right pedigree, not from old money. I was just the incubator for the Vance heir." "I never trusted that woman," Chloe seethed. "She looks at people like they're insects she's deciding whether or not to squash. And Richard, I knew he was weak, but I never thought he was cruel. He let her poison him completely." Elena finally let the tears she'd been holding back fall silent hot tracks down her cheeks. "I feel so stupid. I tried so hard to be the perfect wife to fit into their world. I hosted their charity dinners, I wore the right clothes, I pretended to be fascinated by their polo matches. And for what? To be publicly humiliated and erased. No." Chloe said, her voice firm as she reached across the table and grabbed Elena's hand. "You stop that right now. You are not stupid. You are a loving, wonderful woman who tried to make a life with a spineless coward. This is not on you. This is on him. So what's the plan?" The question hung in the air. "Plan," Elena echoed weakly. "I don't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't spend another night in that house. I couldn't look at him." "Good," Chloe said, her tone shifting into strategic mode. "That's the first step. You and Leo stay here as long as you need. My house is your fortress. Tomorrow we make some calls. First you need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A shark. A dragon. Someone who will make Richard and his mother regret the day they were born." The first call from Richard came at 7:05 a.m. Elena's phone buzzed angrily on the kitchen counter. She stared at it, her heart pounding. "Don't," Chloe advised. "Let it go to voicemail. You don't owe him a conversation." He called 7 more times in the next hour. Then came the texts. "Elena, where are you? This isn't funny. You can't just take my son. Whatever you think I did, you're overreacting. Come home and we'll talk. My mother is very upset." The last text made Elena let out a bitter laugh. Of course Eleanor was upset. Her precious grandson was missing. Around 9 a.m., an unknown number flashed on the screen. Elena, on Chloe's advice, answered it, putting it on speaker. "Elena." The voice was imperious and cold as ice. "Eleanor Vance. Richard tells me you've had some sort of hysterical episode and have taken my grandson. This little tantrum ends now. Bring Leo home immediately." "He is not your grandson to command Eleanor," Elena said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "And he is my son." "I am well aware of the biological facts, dear," Eleanor sneered. "A fact Richard was simply clarifying, I understand. You've always been a bit too emotional. Now be a good girl and stop this nonsense. You wouldn't want things to get unpleasant." It was a threat cloaked in condescension. "You have no idea what unpleasant is," Elena said and hung up the phone. Her hand was trembling, but she felt a surge of adrenaline. The battle lines were drawn. Chloe had already been on her laptop. "I've got a name," she announced. "Jessica Davenport, Davenport & Associates, specializes in high-conflict, high-asset divorces. Her nickname in the legal community is the Lioness. She eats men like Richard for breakfast." An hour later, Elena was sitting in a plush chair opposite Jessica Davenport. The lawyer was a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a steel gray suit with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through to the heart of the matter. She listened to Elena's story without interruption, her face impassive. When Elena finished, Jessica leaned forward, her hands clasped on her large oak desk. Mr. Vance's comment at the bank was not just an insult. "Elena," Jessica said, her voice calm and lethal, "it was a gift. In family law, we often deal in nuances, and he said, she said. Your husband, in a public setting and in front of a verifiable third-party witness, effectively denied the legitimacy of your marriage and your role as a mother. He didn't just call you a surrogate. He framed you as a transactional party, not a maternal one, in a custody dispute that is pure gold." Hope, fierce and bright, bloomed in Elena's chest for the first time in 24 hours. "What does that mean for me, for Leo?" "It means we move fast and we move aggressively," Jessica stated. "We file for an emergency ex parte hearing. We request temporary sole legal and physical custody based on the grounds of potential emotional harm to the child and Mr. Vance's demonstrated denial of your parental status. We'll cite his statement as evidence that he does not view you as an equal co-parent, which puts the child's stable environment at risk. We'll also file for a temporary restraining order to keep him and his mother away from you and Leo until the hearing." It was a whirlwind. Elena felt like she was being swept up in a current far stronger than herself, but this time it was a current pulling her toward safety, not drowning her. She signed the papers, her hand steady. The next afternoon, they were in a sterile courtroom, a far cry from the opulent bank, but infinitely more terrifying. Elena sat beside Jessica, her back ramrod straight. Richard was on the other side of the room with a slick, expensive-looking lawyer who oozed corporate confidence. Richard looked tired and angry. He kept shooting Elena looks that vacillated between pleading and fury. He couldn't believe she had done this. He couldn't believe his little, compliant wife had declared war. Jessica presented their case to the judge, a stern-looking woman with graying hair and no-nonsense glasses. She laid out the events calmly and factually, her tone conveying the gravity of Richard's words. "Your Honor, Mr. Vance's statement, 'She's not my wife, just a surrogate,' is a fundamental rejection of the marital partnership and the maternal bond. It indicates a belief that Mrs. Vance is not a parent with equal rights but a service provider who has fulfilled her contract. This creates a toxic and unstable environment for their 5-year-old son Leo. We believe it's in the child's best interest that he remain in the sole care of his mother, the only parent by Mr. Vance's own admission who is fully committed to her role. Richard's lawyer blustered, calling it a gross mischaracterization and a misunderstanding. He painted Elena as hysterical and impulsive, but Jessica had an affidavit from Brenda, the bank clerk. Jessica had tracked her down. The clerk, horrified by what she had witnessed and shaken by the memory of Leo's confused little face, had agreed to provide a sworn statement confirming the exact wording and the cold, dismissive manner in which Richard had delivered the lines. When the judge read the affidavit, her expression tightened. She looked over her glasses at Richard, her gaze sharp and disapproving. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet, "did you or did you not refer to your wife of 7 years, the woman who gave birth to your son, as just the surrogate in a public place of business?" Richard paled. He stammered, "Your Honor, it was taken out of context. It's a complicated family situation." "It seems quite simple to me," the judge cut in, her voice like gravel. "It shows a profound lack of respect not only for your wife but for the institution of marriage and the role of a mother. That raises serious questions about your judgment." The ruling was swift and stunning. "Temporary sole physical and legal custody is granted to the mother, Elena Vance," the judge declared. "Mr. Vance, you are to have no contact with the child until a full hearing can be scheduled. A temporary restraining order is granted. I am also ordering you to pay temporary child and spousal support effective immediately. We will revisit this in 30 days, during which time I suggest you secure a family therapist and reflect deeply on what it means to be a husband and a father." Richard's jaw dropped. His lawyer looked stunned. A gasp was audible from the back of the courtroom, where Eleanor Vance had slipped in her face a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. Elena felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her knees. She had done it. She had protected her son. As she walked out of the courtroom, she passed Eleanor, whose eyes were slits of pure hatred. "You will regret this." Eleanor hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. We will crush you." Elena looked the older woman dead in the eye. The fear she had lived with for 7 years finally gone, replaced by something harder, something forged in the fires of betrayal. "No, Eleanor," Elena said, her voice steady and clear. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." She walked away, head held high, leaving her mother-in-law standing there momentarily speechless. She had won the first battle. But Elena knew with chilling certainty that the war had just begun. The Vances would not take this defeat lying down. They would come for her with everything they had. The 30 days that followed the court hearing were a grueling war of attrition. The Vances, true to Eleanor's threat, unleashed their considerable power not with a single dramatic cannonball, but with 1,000 insidious cuts. It was a siege designed to isolate, exhaust, and break Elena. The first front was financial. Richard, under his mother's direct command, was ruthlessly efficient. The day after the hearing, the temporary support payment was intentionally late. The joint credit cards were canceled without notice, leaving Elena embarrassed at a grocery store checkout, her cart piled high with food for Leo. The most significant blow came when she discovered the Vance family lawyers had filed a motion to freeze the main joint savings account, claiming Elena's preemptive withdrawal was a misappropriation of marital assets. Suddenly, the cushion she had secured for herself and Leo was tied up in legal limbo. "They're trying to starve you out," Jessica Davenport said during an urgent phone call. "It's a classic tactic of the wealthy spouse. They want you so desperate that you'll be forced to crawl back and accept any terms they offer. We fight it, but the courts move slowly. You need to prepare for a lean few months." Elena, who had left her promising career in graphic design to be a full-time mother at Richard's insistence, a Vance child doesn't get raised by nannies, Eleanor had decreed, was now effectively unemployed and with dwindling resources. The Vance's strategy was clear: render her powerless, then paint her as an unstable provider. She spent her nights at Chloe's kitchen table, her laptop open, frantically updating her portfolio and applying for freelance work. Rejection emails piled up. The industry had moved on in the 6 years she'd been away. Her confidence, already fragile, began to crumble under the weight of financial anxiety. There were days she ate only toast so that Leo could have his chicken nuggets and fresh fruit. The second front was social. The Vance family matriarch Eleanor was a master of the whispered word and the poisoned well. Suddenly, Elena found herself ostracized from the circle of mothers and school acquaintances she had cultivated. Invitations to playdates dried up. Polite smiles were replaced with averted eyes and hurried conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. One afternoon, a mother she'd considered a friend, a woman named Sarah, approached her nervously in the park. "Elena," she started, wringing her hands. "I'm so sorry, but I don't think Leo can come to Oliver's birthday party on Saturday." "Oh, is everything okay?" Elena asked, a knot forming in her stomach. Sarah couldn't meet her eyes. "It's just... Eleanor Vance is a major benefactor for the hospital my husband works for. She made a call. She told people you were unstable, that you were prone to dramatic, erratic behavior, and that you'd kidnapped Leo. She implied you were after the Vance money." The words were a physical blow. They weren't just trying to take her son. They were trying to annihilate her character, to rewrite history so that she was the villain of her own story. "That's not true, Sarah," Elena said, her voice shaking. "You know me." "I know," Sarah whispered, looking miserable. "But I can't risk my husband's career. I'm so sorry." She scurried away, leaving Elena standing alone by the swing set, feeling more isolated than ever. Through it all, Leo was her anchor. He was too young to understand the legal or financial complexities, but he was exquisitely sensitive to the emotional undercurrents. He had more nightmares. He clung to her, asking for Daddy. In quiet moments, his brow furrowed with a confusion that broke Elena's heart. She created a bubble of determined cheerfulness for him. They had picnics on the living room floor, built magnificent Lego castles, and spent hours at the public library. She poured all the love and energy she had into ensuring his world felt safe and stable, even as hers was crumbling. It was in these moments that she found her resolve. Every time Leo laughed, every time he wrapped his small arms around her neck and whispered, "I love you, Mommy," it was a reminder of what she was fighting for. Meanwhile, Richard's attempts at contact were sporadic and unsettling. They were never his own. They were clearly scripted by his mother and their lawyers. He'd send stilted emails, not asking how she was, but demanding an inventory of household items. One evening, a package arrived by courier. It was a children's book about divorce. Inside, a note in Richard's handwriting read, "Maybe this will help you explain to Leo why you've broken our family apart." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He wasn't a participant in the conflict. In his mind, he was a victim of her overreaction. But the siege intended to weaken her was having an unintended effect. It was forging Elena into something new. The fear was burning away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated steel. The humiliation was hardening into resolve. One night, unable to sleep, she was sorting through a box of old documents she'd taken from the house, looking for anything that might help her case. Tucked away in a folder labeled IVF, she found something she had forgotten about. It was a legal document, a draft from early in their fertility journey, drawn up by the Vance family's primary lawyer. Her blood ran cold as she read it. It wasn't a standard IVF consent form. It was a co-parenting and surrogacy agreement. A very specific, very brutal one. It stipulated that in the event of a successful pregnancy where Elena carried the child, she would be recognized as the gestational carrier. It laid out terms for relinquishing certain parental rights to Richard in the event of a separation, giving him sole decision-making power over the child's education, upbringing, and inheritance. It even contained a clause that in the event of Richard's death, primary custody would transfer not to Elena, but to his parents Harrison and Eleanor Vance. She remembered the day Richard had presented it to her. They were in their beautiful sunlit kitchen. He'd been casual about it. "It's just a formality, darling. Mother's lawyers are just being thorough. You know how they are. Just sign it so we can move forward. Elena, even the younger, more pliable version of herself, had been horrified. This is insane, Richard. This document makes me sound like a broodmare. It strips me of my rights as a mother. They had their first real fight that day. He'd accused her of not trusting him, of being difficult. She had refused to sign. She had torn it up in front of him, telling him they would proceed as husband and wife or not at all. Overwhelmed by his desire for a child, he had eventually relented, and they had moved forward with the standard clinic paperwork which listed them both as intended parents. She had thought that was the end of it, that she had won. Now, looking at this draft, she realized she hadn't won. She had only postponed the battle. This document was the blueprint for their entire worldview. In their minds, she was a surrogate one who had simply refused to sign the paperwork. Richard's comment in the bank wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was the articulation of a long-held, deeply ingrained belief. She immediately called Jessica. "I've found something," she said, her voice tense with excitement. "I think I've found their playbook." Jessica's reaction was electric. "Elena, this is phenomenal. This isn't just a draft. It's a smoking gun. It demonstrates premeditation. It proves that their attempts to recharacterize you as a surrogate are not a recent fabrication in response to your leaving, but a long-standing strategy. This completely corroborates our narrative. They won't see it coming." A new twist emerged a week before the next hearing. Jessica received a call from an unknown number. It was Brenda, the bank clerk. She sounded terrified. "They found me," Brenda whispered into the phone. "A lawyer for the Vance family. He came to my house. He was very intimidating. He told me my memory of the event must be mistaken. He said Mr. Vance was under a lot of stress, and that I must have misunderstood a complex legal discussion. He suggested that it would be in my best interest to amend my affidavit, or perhaps not testify at all." "Did he threaten you, Brenda?" Jessica asked calmly. "He said that people in high places have long memories and that accusations can damage a person's career. It wasn't direct, but I knew what he meant. I have a mortgage. I have kids in college. I'm scared." "You have every right to be," Jessica soothed. "But what he did is called witness tampering, and it is a serious crime. Brenda, your testimony is crucial. It's the one piece of this puzzle that isn't from someone in the family. You are the impartial observer." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Elena, who was in Jessica's office for a strategy meeting, held her breath. "That poor woman," Brenda finally said, her voice filled with a surprising strength. "And her little boy." He asked his mom what a surrogate was. No kid should have to ask that. "I'll testify. I'm not going to let them bully me into letting them destroy that family." The pieces were falling into place. The Vances, in their arrogance, were overplaying their hand. Their attempts to intimidate and control had provided Elena and Jessica with the very weapons they needed. The night before the hearing, Elena tucked Leo into his bed in Chloe's guest room. "Mommy," he asked drowsily, "are we going to go home soon?" Elena smoothed his hair back from his forehead, her heart aching. "We are home, my love," she said softly. "Home is wherever you and I are together, and I promise you no one is ever going to take me away from you." He nodded, his eyes fluttering shut. She kissed his forehead and stood in the doorway for a long time, watching him sleep. The siege had been brutal, but she had not broken. She was no longer just defending herself. She was on the attack. Tomorrow in court she would not be the timid wife or the hysterical runaway. She would be Elena Leo's mother, and she would be the one to burn their kingdom to the ground. The air in courtroom 4B was stale and thick with a potent mixture of expensive perfume, nervous sweat, and unspoken animosity. This was a larger, more imposing chamber than the one used for the emergency hearing, its dark wood paneling and high ceilings designed to convey the gravity of the law. The gallery was peppered with onlookers. A few journalists who had caught wind of a high society scandal and several immaculately dressed women who were clearly friends of Eleanor Vance there to witness what they assumed would be the swift and brutal dismantling of a social upstart. Elena sat at the plaintiff's table beside Jessica Davenport, her posture a study in quiet defiance. She had deliberately chosen to wear the same simple navy dress from that fateful day at the bank. It was her armor, a silent testament to the moment that had started it all. Her hands, which had trembled for weeks, now rested calmly in her lap. She was no longer a victim of circumstances. She was the architect of this reckoning. Across the aisle, the Vance contingent was a portrait of entitled fury. Richard sat hunched between his lead counsel, a notoriously aggressive attorney named Marcus Thorne, and his mother. Eleanor Vance, draped in a severe charcoal gray suit with a diamond brooch glinting like a shard of ice at her throat, surveyed the room as if it were a poorly managed country club she was considering shutting down. Her gaze swept over Elena with a dismissive coldness that could have frozen water. Marcus Thorne began, his voice booming with manufactured confidence. His strategy was clear: bury Elena under an avalanche of financial insinuation. He called a forensic accountant to the stand, a prim man who, with the help of a dozen complex charts, proceeded to paint a picture of Elena as a cunning and materialistic schemer. He detailed her systematic withdrawals from the joint account in the weeks leading up to her departure, the value of jewelry Richard had gifted her over the years, and a luxury vacation they had taken 2 years prior. "So, as you can see, Your Honor," Thorne concluded with a flourish, "Ms. Vance's actions are consistent with a person planning a significant financial event, namely absconding with marital assets in preparation for a lucrative divorce." When it was Jessica's turn to cross-examine, she approached the witness with a deceptively calm demeanor. "Mr. Davies," she began, "you've detailed these systematic withdrawals. Could you please pull up Exhibit C, the one showing the transactions from the month before my client left her home?" The chart reappeared on the screen. "Thank you," Jessica said. "This withdrawal for $287.50 on the 4th. Where was that made?" The accountant peered at his notes. "At a Shop and Save grocery store." "And this one for $89.99 on the 12th? "Kids Closet, a children's clothing store." Jessica continued down the list, her voice even and methodical. "A payment to the pediatrician, a charge for Leo's tumbling class, the purchase of school supplies." "Mr. Davies, does this look like the spending pattern of a woman liquidating assets for a secret escape? Or does it look like the spending pattern of a mother buying groceries, clothes, and paying for her child's activities?" The accountant shifted uncomfortably. "Well, when viewed in isolation." "Let's view it in context then," Jessica pressed. "The grand total of these systematic withdrawals over a 6-week period was just over $4,000, correct? From an account that before being frozen by your client had a balance of nearly $200,000. "The numbers are correct," he conceded. "Thank you, Mr. Davies. No further questions." Jessica walked back to her table, having effortlessly reframed the Vance's narrative from one of greed to one of petty cruelty. They weren't just rich. They were trying to stop a mother from buying her son's school shoes. Thorne's next witness was a child psychologist, Dr. Alistair Finch, who spoke in smooth therapeutic tones about the potential trauma of parental alienation and the importance of stability. It was a clear attempt to paint Elena's flight as a selfish act that had harmed Leo. On cross-examination, Jessica leaned forward. "Doctor, you speak of a stable environment. Would you agree that a core component of such an environment is mutual respect between the parents?" "Absolutely," Dr. Finch agreed, smiling serenely. "It's paramount. And would you agree that children even at 5 years old are incredibly perceptive to emotional discord and disrespect between their parents?" "Yes, they are like emotional barometers." "So," Jessica's voice sharpened slightly, "if a child were to witness his father publicly deny that his mother is his wife and instead label her as just a surrogate, a term the child wouldn't even understand, what kind of impact might that have on the child's sense of stability and security?" Dr. Finch's professional smile faltered. "That would be highly confusing and distressing for a child. It would undermine the very foundation of the family unit in the child's mind. It would, in fact, be a profound act of disrespect, wouldn't you say? One that would cause significant emotional harm? Objection, Thorne called out. Counsel is leading the witness. Sustained. Rephrase, Ms. Davenport. The judge instructed, though she was watching the exchange with keen interest. Certainly, Your Honor, Jessica said. Dr. Finch, would such a statement made by a father about a mother in front of their child be considered conducive to a healthy, respectful, and stable environment? The doctor cleared his throat. No, it would be the opposite. Thank you, doctor. The very opposite. The momentum had shifted palpably. It was now Jessica's turn to present her case. Her first call was Brenda Peters, the bank clerk. Brenda walked to the stand, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, a woman of ordinary life thrust into a high-stakes drama. Yet when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. She recounted the events of that day, her testimony, a damningly simple recitation of the facts. Thorne attempted to dismantle her on cross-examination. Ms. Peters, you attend to dozens of clients a day. You deal with complex financial matters. Isn't it possible that you simply misheard Mr. Vance? That his words were taken out of context? Brenda looked not at Thorne, but directly at the judge. Your Honor, I have worked in customer-facing roles for my entire adult life. I know when someone is talking about finances, and I know when someone is being deliberately cruel. Mr. Vance wasn't looking at a document. He waved his hand at Mrs. Vance at Elena as if she were an object, and he said those words. They were meant to diminish her. There was no other context. Thorne, frustrated, tried a different tack. You have a personal bias, don't you? You felt sorry for Ms. Vance, and so your memory has been colored by emotion. Brenda took a deep breath. I felt sorry for her, yes. But that's not what this is about. I'm here because last Tuesday a man from your law firm, a Mr. Jennings, came to my home. He sat in my living room and told me that the Vance family were important people, and that it would be a shame if a misunderstanding were to negatively impact my career. He suggested I might want to revise my affidavit to state I couldn't clearly recall the conversation. He called it finding a more accurate memory. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Jessica rose slowly. Your Honor, I believe what Ms. Peters is describing is witness tampering. The judge's face was thunderous. She fixed her gaze on Marcus Thorne, who looked as if he'd been struck. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice dangerously low, is a Mr. Jennings an associate at your firm? Thorne's face was ashen. He is a junior associate, Your Honor. I was not aware of his actions. It was a feeble defense, and everyone in the room knew it. The Vance's credibility was not just damaged, it was incinerated. Next, Jessica called the dragon into her own lair. The plaintiff calls Eleanor Vance. Eleanor strode to the stand, her composure a mask of granite, but Jessica could see the fury simmering just beneath the surface. Mrs. Vance, Jessica started, her tone even. You heard Dr. Finch's testimony about the importance of parental respect. Do you respect Elena as the mother of your grandson? I respect her role. Eleanor answered, the distinction deliberate and sharp. Just her role, not the person. Her role is what is relevant to my grandson. Jessica held up the plastic sleeve document. Your Honor, I am entering into evidence Plaintiff's Exhibit 14. It is a draft agreement your lawyers prepared for Elena to sign before she underwent IVF. Mrs. Vance, do you recognize it? Eleanor's eyes narrowed. It was a prudent legal document to protect my family's interests. Let's examine those interests, Jessica said, walking towards the witness box. Clause 4B states that in the event of a separation, Elena would relinquish all primary decision-making rights regarding the child's education and medical care to Richard. Clause 7C states that in the event of your son Richard's death, sole custody of Leo would be transferred to you and your husband. Is that correct? A boy like Leo needs to be raised with a certain structure. We wanted to ensure his legacy. Eleanor sniffed. So a 5-year-old child has a legacy, but his own mother doesn't have rights. Jessica's voice was sharp as a scalpel. Isn't it true, Mrs. Vance, that you have never not for 1 second seen Elena as a member of your family, that you saw her as a biological necessity, a vessel hired to produce a Vance heir, who then had the audacity to believe she was entitled to be a mother? The dam of Eleanor's composure finally broke, her face contorted in a sneer of pure, unadulterated contempt. Entitled. That girl came from nothing, a suburban family with no name, no connections. She should have been on her knees with gratitude. That my son gave her a life she could only dream of. Leo is a Vance. He has our blood. He needed to be protected from her commonness, her sentimentality. The vicious words echoed in the stunned silence of the courtroom. She had confessed to the core accusation, her arrogance blinding her to the damage she was inflicting. Richard stared at his mother, his face a mask of horror as if seeing her for the first time. The final witness was Richard himself. He walked to the stand like a man heading to his own execution. He was pale, broken. Jessica didn't attack. Her voice was soft, almost sympathetic. Richard, she began, dropping the formal Mr. Vance. Let's go back. Tell me about the day you and Elena found out the IVF had worked. He looked up, his eyes swimming with tears. It was the happiest day of my life, he whispered. We just held each other and cried. And the day Leo was born. When you held him for the first time and you looked at Elena, the woman who had gone through all of that to give you this child, what did you feel for her? A sob escaped Richard's throat. Everything. I felt everything. Gratitude. Awe. So much love I thought my heart would burst. He finally turned and looked at Elena, his face pleading. She was my world. What happened to that man Richard? Jessica asked gently. Where did he go? The man who felt all that love, who saw his wife as his world. How did he become the man who could dismiss her in a bank in front of her son as just a surrogate? Richard's gaze drifted helplessly towards his mother. The answer hung unspoken in the air. He was a man caught in a web woven of money expectation and his mother's suffocating will. I was a coward. He finally wept, his voice cracking. I let her. I let the pressure. I thought it was just easier to say the words to keep the peace. I never imagined it would end like this. I destroyed everything. I destroyed my own family. He buried his face in his hands, his body shaking with racking sobs. It wasn't a performance. It was the complete and utter collapse of a man who had finally realized the catastrophic price of his own weakness. The judge delivered her ruling after a short recess. She removed her glasses and looked down from the bench, her expression one of profound disappointment and disgust. She spoke at length about the sanctity of the parent-child bond and the legal and moral definition of a mother. She addressed Eleanor directly. Mrs. Vance, this court finds your worldview to be not only archaic and offensive, but poisonous. You see your grandson not as a child to be loved, but as a possession to be curated. Your influence is toxic, and I am ensuring it ends today. Then she turned to Richard. Mr. Vance, your tears may be genuine today, but they come far too late. A man's character is not defined by his feelings, but by his actions, especially under pressure. You failed your wife, and you failed your son in the most fundamental way. You allowed your marriage to be denigrated and your wife to be humiliated. You are not at this time a fitting custodian for this child. The final words were delivered with the force of a hammer blow. Therefore, this court awards sole legal and physical custody of the child Leo Vance to his mother, Elena Vance. The temporary support order is made permanent. Mr. Vance will be granted supervised visitation every other Saturday contingent upon proof of his weekly attendance at individual therapy. He is to have no unsupervised contact with the child until such time as a therapist can attest to this court that he understands the gravity of his actions. The gavel fell. The sound was finite. Final. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over Elena so powerfully she felt dizzy. It was over. She had won. She had. Jessica gave her hand a firm, triumphant squeeze. Across the room, Richard sat motionless, a hollowed-out shell. Eleanor, however, rose to her feet, her face contorted with a rage so pure it was terrifying. She shot Elena a look that promised a lifetime of enmity, then turned and swept out of the courtroom, a queen dethroned, leaving her broken son behind. Months later, the oppressive gray of the courtroom had been replaced by the warm, buttery yellow Elena had painted the walls of her new 2-bedroom apartment. Life was smaller, but infinitely brighter. She had found a job at a vibrant marketing firm, and while the pay was less, the satisfaction of earning her own way was immeasurable. Leo was thriving, his nightmares gone, replaced by the easy laughter of a child who feels secure. One evening, after tucking Leo into bed, Elena's phone buzzed. It was Richard. She hesitated, then answered. His voice was quiet, stripped of its old entitled cadence. "Elena, I've been going to therapy 3 times a week." He paused. "He's making me see things. The way I let my mother's voice become my own. The way I took you for granted. The way I saw your love as an obligation I was owed, not a gift I had to cherish." He took a shaky breath. "I know sorry is a useless word. It doesn't fix anything. But I am sorry, Elena. I'm sorry for the man I became. I'm sorry for not being the man you married." A year ago, his words might have sparked anger, or even a flicker of hope for reconciliation. Now they did neither. Elena felt a sense of calm closure. "I'm glad you're getting help, Richard," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Do it for yourself, and do it so one day you can be the father Leo deserves." "Is there any chance for us?" he asked, his voice small. "The us you're thinking of is gone, Richard," she replied without malice. "I'm not Elena Vance anymore. I'm Elena Reyes, and I'm happy." She ended the call, looking around the small, peaceful living room that was all hers. She was not a surrogate. She was not a possession. She was not defined by a man's weakness or a family's arrogance. She was a mother, a creator, a survivor. She had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged. And in the quiet of her new life, she was for the first time truly, completely free. Elena's story is a powerful testament to the fact that our worth is not defined by how others see us, but by how we fight for ourselves. A thoughtless, cruel comment was the catalyst. But it was Elena's strength that turned a moment of public humiliation into a declaration of independence. She teaches us that true family isn't about bloodlines or bank accounts, but about love, respect, and the courage to protect that love against all odds. Her battle wasn't just for custody, it was for her soul, and in winning she reclaimed not only her son, but her own identity.